Absolutely. And next Friday, how exciting will that day be?
Uh-huh. Well, I just looked up and saw that it is 12 o'clock. I do like to try to start meetings on time and respect everybody's time. So we will go ahead and get started. I'm not 100% sure I've got the view that shows everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of call roll and make sure we don't have any call-ins, if that's okay. Angela, I see you. Katrine, I see you. Let's see, Dell Phillips. Okay. Is Charlie Baum here, Representative Baum? Scott Becker. Annette Tudor. Vanessa Presson. I see a VP down there. Is that Vanessa Presson?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
It's a little low, but I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I'll work on that.
Although, no, that was much better, actually. I think you got it. Welcome. Hello.
Thank you.
All right, Bill. I got Bill Spurlock. Jason Golden. John Atkin. Senator Rose, are you there? All right, I know we got Robert there. There's Annette. Hey, Annette.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. Let me pull up my copy. I'll ask our facilitator. Do they want us to read this statement every single time? I know we've been over it.
They do.
They
yes.
do. I thought they did. Okay.
Yes.
Just so the rest of you know, that's why I'm reading it. It's not my own preference to hear my own voice. All right, here's the statement before we get started. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's funding formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. All right, so we can check that box. If I enunciated well, it's because I just got done calling the elementary school spelling bee earlier, which is the most nerve-wracking thing I do all year long. But we got through it and a champion was crowned. All right, that is the statement. We've done the roll call and the attendance. Again, I'll say I'm Ted Horrell, the superintendent of Lakeland School System. I appreciate everybody that can making time to do this. It's very difficult to get so many people's schedules to align, and I appreciate everybody making some time to do that. So the first thing on the agenda is follow-ups from meeting 2. We went over the PowerPoint deck from the last meeting, and the focus of that meeting was talking about things that items that should be included in the funding formula and deciding if those were things that must be in the formula, should be in the formula, or are kind of pie in the sky wishes, kind of a wish list that were in the formula. I thought we had a productive discussion, and I reviewed the feedback that was shared, and that's been passed up to the steering committee for that. before I go any further, and forgive me if I'm incorrect, Ms. Preston, is this your first call with us? Is that right?
Yes, it is. And my apologies to the group, but
okay.
I'm very, very glad to join.
We are glad to have you. Do you want to say just a couple of sentences about kind of your role and why you think you were selected to be on this committee?
Well, I'm not real sure why I was selected, but I will say I'm Vanessa Preston. I'm the complex HR manager at the new facility in Humboldt. It is a built from the ground up facility. So we are hiring left and right, like everyone else, but we're about at 1,000 people right now, just that we've hired in the last about 5-6 months. So lots of hiring going on here, and I am very interested in education. We've done a lot of different things helping to facilitate different educational initiatives that relates to more on the technical education side. But I have a heart for kids and for schools in especially rural areas. So I'm hoping to be able to give some type of perspective you might need from the business side. But again, happy and grateful to serve with all of you.
Great. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
It sounds like you put the fast growing in the fast growing communities kind of part of the title. Is that right?
Yes, we're growing.
Okay. All right. One of the things that we're encouraged to do again is engage with stakeholder communities between meetings. And I know that has happened. And Katrine, I know you sent some really thorough and good feedback that you got from your community. We're not going to go over that right now, and I know that's been sent up, but if we have a little time at the end, we may go over that if that's okay. We'll kind of back plan that. We're reminded that we all have expertise and we want as many viewpoints as possible. So kind of what's on the agenda for today is to run through a feedback summary of that's been put together of what feedback has been received overall, and it's been categorized into several different kind of buckets, I guess, as they like to say. We're going to start by we're just reviewing this pyramid, which kind of shows us what we believe the goal is of this process in a new funding formula, that there would be a base amount allocated to each student in the state, no matter what. If you are a student, you're getting at least this amount. That amount would go with you to your district and presumably, I think, to your school to help educate you. There would be multiple weights that would go on top of that base, depending on categories of students that they fall in. There'd be some direct funding, of course, as there always is, that goes to students on specific programs, and then some outcome-based dollars that might be based on getting results with higher need student groups, as it says. So what we have on this slide is some things that have been requested on the overall feedback generally. And you can look at those and forgive me for kind of reading through them, but one, that districts should not receive less state funding that they receive through the current BEP. Is there anybody on this committee that disagrees with that? Okay, I think we're all on the same page. We don't want less money. Maintain flexibility for local district budgeting. This is something I think we all are on board with. Speak up if you disagree. Ensure that whatever is currently funded outside of the BEP is included in a new formula. What do you take that to mean? Maybe some of the superintendents. How should we read that?
Would it be, Ted, would it be based on, once again, fiscal impact of the local community?
I think so. And I think really anything that's outside the BEP that we pay for, that's the only options we have to pay for those things. So I believe I'm reading that the same way you are. The things that we're expected to pay for that aren't specifically funded through the BEP need to be funded. We don't need to be having to look around for other sources to pay for those things. The local match component should be stable, what it would be under the BEP, for 3 to 5 years. I think this is something we probably have some thoughts on. Is there any feedback as to what that means, and maybe to the benefit of folks that aren't in school funding budget worlds? Is there anybody that kind of wants to speak to what that means?
Yeah, Ted, with Rutherford County, we're adding over 1,000 kids a year, and and our county is funds us adequately, more so than probably a lot of others. However, that using that moratorium for 3 to 5 years, I'm kind of concerned in terms of what that looks like, over time, during that time. Are we able to adequately, keep that base stable? Or I'm assuming it would grow somewhat, but that the MOE may create some issues there.
Yeah, MOE being maintenance of effort, because all of our local funding groups are basically not allowed to give us less than they did the year before unless there's extraordinary circumstances like loss of students. So I think the 5 years is encouraging, that at least it would be there for a little bit, but what happens then? 5 years isn't very long in the life of a student, certainly, and their academic progress. So.
And I do understand that, because there are a lot of our communities that do need that time. But I'm not so sure on this call here if that would be, because we are in the suburban and fastest growing districts. I don't know if there could be some flexibility there, I guess. I don't know.
I think there are some concerns from some of the municipalities that they believe that maintenance of effort is a outdated term. I think we know that was in the letter that I got sent to me that I forwarded, and so I think we've got to, look at it from both sides. I mean, I certainly support. We don't want the local communities to lose, local schools to lose funding, but I think these communities wonder, are they paying more than their share? What's going to happen in a student-based funding with relation to maintenance of effort and the requirements there? So I think that's a big concern.
Definitely. And certainly acknowledge that there are meetings coming up that include those municipal leaders and finance directors in those discussions. So I think we're just getting started on that part of the conversation.
Let me verify that, because that was a question. That's what I thought I had heard, is that the commissioner is going to meet with the leaders in finance, because the local community said they hadn't heard anything about that. So is that the plan?
Yes, we've and everybody else can speak up. We've received a list of when all those meetings are. They have been they're by region. They said who they would like to be invited. We just found out the location of ours, and I believe it's Tuesday of next week. So we're working with our local municipality, and they've got their commissioner and the city manager, and I believe their finance director all coming, and our board chairs are invited. So it'll definitely introduce some new folks to the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. Any other questions or comments on that? All right. Well, let's kind of get down to the nitty gritty. This is the things that have been mentioned that would be included in the base. And I think it was Representative Baum noted, I think wisely in the last meeting, there's certain things we really don't need to talk about and be in the base, just in that they're so obvious in terms of academic needs. But the resources consistently named in public feedback, they note that would be kind of the thought absolutely need to be added to the base. Our nurses at every school or the nationally recommended ratio, counselors at every school or the nationally recommended ratio, school psychologists at the nationally recommended ratio, teacher salaries and benefits, flexibility for facility funding, and deferred maintenance. And what we're being asked to do is provide feedback on the components of this list that we support, would add or change, or anything else we have on this topic. So this would be in addition to the things that we've really mentioned. So when we talk about things that must be in the base, these are the big ones. And I'm assuming, is there anybody that looks at those and thinks that shouldn't be added to the base?
Ted, I do have one.
Yeah.
Transportation costs.
I agree with that one. We talked about that last time, and I think there maybe could even be we even discussed maybe the possibility of a multiplier or a ratio depending on, I think, disparity or not disparity, how far students are dispersed in the community, if that's the right word. It's a lot of money, and I do think we agreed in the last meeting that even though transportation is technically not required, it's increasingly just de facto required. If we're going to meet our accountability thresholds and get the students where they need to be to get an education, we've got to get them to school, and there's not a lot of options there.
I
Any
also
other-
think in the feedback that we reviewed in preparation for this meeting, bus drivers was specifically seemed to be repeated in the feedback that I was looking at as well. I know that connects to transportation cost.
Right.
I had another one that was brought up to me by a couple of communities that had to do with safety and school resource officers being part of the base. And I know we had some discussion previously of whether that's funded by the cities or whatever, but if you look at what's going on in the schools now, that was an area that they felt pretty strongly that ought to be funded in the base.
I agree, and I'll add that there's a lot of conversation about what's an SRO versus a security officer, and we've in our two schools we've got a county funded actual SRO in the middle school, and then we have a retired lieutenant with the sheriff's department that is our employee at the elementary school. And frankly, there's a lot of advantages of having that person be our employee. We're told sometimes, we're reminded sometimes, well, that officer doesn't work for you. He works for the county, and we can give him some direction, but be careful, he's not your employee. We kind of like the one that's our employee. I mean, in terms of assignments and things. So I agree with Bob. Anything else just overwhelmingly that's not on this list that's come up? Can I ask a question to the other superintendents? I don't want to take up too much time because I believe it may be specific for me. We don't qualify, our district, and there are another couple of municipal districts that are in this category. We don't qualify for voluntary pre-K. So our preschool classes that we offer are the federally required special education classes. Recent rules have required that we have a ratio of typical peers that's equal to the number of special ed students in that classroom. And in our district, we've gone from 1 to 2 to 3 classrooms, and we receive no funding for it. We don't get any funding for those classes. In a system that qualifies for VPK, is that all covered, or is that a different category? And I'm really ignorant about it. How does that?
TED is not fully funded. And I think the state allocates that as your numbers, I guess at-risk numbers increase, but it's still not fully funded. Now, Katerine, you may know exactly how much. I'm not sure.
I don't know the exact amount, but you are right. It is not fully funded, and it is a number that your system gets based on your at-risk. For
the VPK, is that right?
That is correct.
And are you able to use the VPK dollars to cover the special ed preschool, or is that just that's a different pot of money? Okay.
No, now within VPK, students with disabilities may get some priority to enter into those classes, but there's not funding that you're getting for your special ed preschool.
All right. So I've always thought that is something that's been continually overlooked. Is that something that should be added? I mean, just that's not there, our special needs preschool funding?
I would advocate for it. I mean, I think it's quite frankly, if that's what we're wanting to do, is to close the gaps and things of that nature. When we look at the outcomes.
So I think I've got 3 teachers and 6 assistants I'm paying to be in these 3 classrooms or something close to it. And it's a big chunk of change. And I can't find in the BEP where I'm getting any money, for it.
No, that's right.
Okay.
I would say expand voluntary pre-K also, though. We have 5 elementary schools in our district. 4 of them qualify for the voluntary pre-K. The other one is locally funded, so we don't get any dollars for that other one. And it's just a local commitment that we have a pre-K, at least one pre-K in each of our elementary schools. So I would say that, as well as we have the same issue with the special ed pre-K.
Okay, so maybe funding for pre-K students, both VPK and special needs classrooms, because It's wild. Takes up a lot of space too. I mean, it's something we're doing and spending a lot of time, effort, and money on, and just doesn't seem to be recognized sometimes. Okay. Anything else? We've had some good ones brought up so far. Big picture stuff. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the weights. We'll go to the next slide and talk about the things that would not be part of the base. Some students would not receive additional funds for these categories because they don't fall into these categories. But some students would. And we've got some examples of other districts or other states rather that use these weights, but these are the ones that seem to be coming up. Most of these were not, probably not surprises, but the weights that have received the most positive feedback are economically disadvantaged and concentration of poverty. And I understand that to be two different ones. There's a weight that would go with each student who is economically disadvantaged. If you get a certain percentage of those students, I think the idea is that causes additional challenges on top of just having, that individual student. Students with disabilities with tiers based on the cost to provide services, English learners also with tiers based on English proficiency, rural students in rural districts, sparsity, that's the word I was looking for, sparsity in transportation. I think that defines students that are spread out in a district. Fast growing, which is obviously most of us, I believe, in charter enrollment. Any feedback on those as being categories for weights, and are there any that are obviously missing?
Well, you have listed in the next category that gifted is not listed, and that's one that I noticed in some of the information that was sent on some of the other states that gifted is a part of that, and I think that they're something that we ought to consider.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
And I would also lift up the K2 class sizes. We all know that the foundational skills, whether it's literacy or numeracy, are critical for our students to acquire at a high level of mastery. And to do that, you really need smaller numbers so that they are prepared and ready to go and flourish in those upper grades. So I think there should be consideration to K2 class sizes.
I agree with that.
Great feedback. Does anybody have an interpretation of the category charter enrollment, of what that might mean? I was a bit flummoxed by it.
I had the same question.
Okay.
Does that mean there's support for additional funding for charter enrollment within a community?
I honestly, maybe, I'm not sure. I didn't know if somebody was familiar with that concept, maybe more than I was.
I'll add that to the list of our questions that we would like to have answered
Okay.
by the TN-EDU group.
And is this a compilation of feedback from all the public town hall meetings, anything that was submitted? When we say most positive feedback, where is that all coming from?
It's coming from the town hall meetings. These are the trends that came out of the town hall meetings, not specific to each subgroup or subcommittee, but just the trends overall.
Okay.
Thank you for getting that clarification, Annette. I think it's a good question. Are there any that we can talk about it. Are there any that we think should be pulled off there? Are there any that you think, I don't know that costs more money?
Well, I would pull off charter enrollment, but that's just, we don't have charter schools in our area. Knock on wood, I'm sure they're coming at some point, but that's not something that, from my perspective on this committee and public education, that my folks in my region have represented as a high priority that would justify a weight.
Yeah, and we don't have any in Clarksville, Montgomery either.
Well,
So
we've just received two additional letters of intent, and we've got one under consideration right now. I think the context of what that means would probably help me out as, you know, what does that mean, you know, waiting the charter enrollment?
Yeah.
We don't have any in Lakeland geographically, but there are a lot in Shelby County. Obviously, that's a concentration of charters. I personally, and this is an if the concept is a student attending a charter school gets an additional weight because of the administrative costs or facilities costs or whatever of opening, you know, innovative charter schools, as they're sometimes called, my community would be strongly opposed to that. And I'm a bit afraid that that's what they're talking about, that if you go to a charter school, you might get more money than if you went to a traditional public school. But we'll wait and review the response, I guess we get, Penny, just to see.
I'll get a clarification and we can discuss it in meeting 4 during our follow-up.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. As was noted, they mentioned the ones that weren't considered as much. I think Dr. Schwinn said at a call she had with the superintendent's group. So there were some that she was surprised had not gotten as much comment, at least publicly, and that was gifted, as was mentioned, dyslexia, small LEA size, K2 small class size, weight. So we've mentioned 2 of those, K2 small class size and gifted. Dyslexia, small LEA size, are these things that should be added for weights?
So does dyslexia fall under in a previous slide where we talked about that anything that's currently funded outside of the BEP is included in the new formula? Would dyslexia not fall under that? Could be considered an unfunded mandate, in my opinion. One of those, I guess it was from the overall feedback, just general slide. So I would push that up. I mean, the RTI intervention for a district my size, we've got 1 that's funded and we need them really in every building, and we have 7 buildings. So that's a bit unfunded. I'm not sure how and maybe it's, you know, based on what I've looked at, the research, the information that was pushed out to us, there are different ways to weight. So it doesn't mean it has to carry as much weight as students with disabilities as a whole, right, for instance. Right. But maybe because there is some level of significant administrative responsibility that comes with screening for dyslexia and then providing those interventions.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about Annette's statement about RTI and what's funded, et cetera, you know, I've heard about maybe an RTI staff person at every school. Then I begin thinking about an assistant principal at every school. Where do those items go into? Is that going into the base under, you know, teacher salary? I don't know, Ted, if you or Penny know about that question.
In the others, I'm not certain where it's supposed to go, but in the other subcommittees I facilitate, they've added that in the base.
I think I'd want to go back and consider making a modification to the base to include assistant principals, to include RTI personnel, minimally one at each school. You know, I'm in a district that has 7 schools and 4 do not have an assistant principal. Mm. We are funded as a district for 1 point something assistant principals. And it's same for RTI. We don't have them everywhere. We need them.
And so I think one of the, you know, probably challenges just from a financial side is how do you fund that? Because there are schools with 200 kids. We have a school with, you know, 1,200 kids. So when we say 1 per school, I guess one way to do it is you put an assistant principal salaries and you count the number of schools in the state and you put all that in the base and divide it by the number of kids would be one way to do that. But is there, and then I suppose if you were at a bigger school and didn't want to have the additional ones, then you'd have, there would be a economy of scale benefit to having a bigger school.
Yeah, I think if it was put into the base, we would see, in my mind, more than what we're seeing now.
Yes. Oh, there's no doubt. No doubt. I agree. Well, I second that recommendation. Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was going to change the subject. So go ahead and finish that one first.
Is everybody comfortable putting that as a recommendation from the subcommittee? assistant principals.
Sure.
And I think we should include RTI
RTI as well.
coordinators.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about RTI support personnel at minimally one at each school.
Hmm.
You know, again, I'm in a district that does not have that right now, and we really could use that benefit if we're talking about closing gaps in learning loss and meeting unique needs of all students.
Agreed. Well, and I had an interesting conversation with some EL teachers the other day about the way our schedule, I was not aware it was this, I guess, bad for lack of a better term, but that the RTI period, I think, is at the intervention period is at the same time that they're supposed to be meeting with EL students, and we have EL students in need of intervention. So it all kinds of, it's this block of time, but they're all stealing the kids from one to the other, so they're not really getting all that they're supposed to be getting at any point. So staffing helps. Okay, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so going back to the one on the small LEA size, just make sure I understand what that one is. Is that because the LEAs are so small that they don't get enough of a, by doing it per student, they wouldn't get enough funding to meet their basic needs, or what they're, what's, when they talk about small LEA size, what are they talking about there?
I think that's a great question too. And Penny, we may need to get some clarification there. I know we've got about 1,900 in our LEA. Sometimes I think we're considered a small LEA, and then I look at the other ones on the list and realize there are quite a few that are smaller.
There's some pretty small ones. That may be what that issue is that you got to have some floor level or something like that.
Yeah.
The Northwest region has 5 one-school districts. And so I'm wondering if small LEA size doesn't mean, you know, those one-school districts.
Mm-hmm.
I will add that to our clarification as well.
I was wondering what the student population would be that constitutes small.
Good question.
That's a great question. Yeah. We wouldn't feel so small if Shelby County wasn't right next door, probably. Maybe we'd feel big in some other areas. Okay. So I think the thought was that dyslexia, frankly, because we have to screen everybody, you know, for starters, at least partially should be included in the base for that process. And then if the child actually has dyslexia, is that a weight then? Or if that makes sense? I mean, you've got the screening and kind of the, you know, running this unfunded mandate, like you said, but then at some point you've got to serve that child. Would that be a additional weight?
Yeah, I would think you could pull that because you're marking who has characteristics of dyslexia within your SIS. And so that could be pulled and weighted once they're identified with those characteristics. I like the idea of the base having the addition of dyslexia because all students are screened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great.
So let me clarify that the group would like for dyslexia to be in the base instead of the weighted section.
I think what we're asking is that we'd like an acknowledgement that there is a staff intensive process of doing dyslexia screening that costs money, and equipment and testing materials and all these things that in the way it's done in some cases that would be in the base, but then that there are additional costs depending on the number of students you have with dyslexia. That might be a weight for those students.
Yeah, so looking at it in both sections, base and weight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will. I guess I will speak for my neighbors in Shelby County. We've got rural as a weight. Is urban a weight as well? I mean, I know there are challenges to both, certainly.
I was just about to ask that when I saw rural.
Is that covered under concentration of poverty, or is that
Possibly. But are the rural challenges covered under concentration of poverty as well?
I'm not sure that it is. Rural in some respects may fall back to a small LEA size too. I don't know. But also services, the rural services aren't there like they are within the urban areas, I think. Availability to services.
That makes a lot of sense, Bob. Well, and also, access to, I think that's what you're talking about, access to the employees as well, access to the, you may have to pay more to get a
Exactly. Yeah.
biology teacher out in.
One of the biggest challenges they have is getting teachers to I've got Scott County, Campbell County in my district that I represent, and that's a big issue.
Yep. Okay. All right. So are we, since Angela was going to bring it up too, are we comfortable that urban gets covered a bit with economically disadvantaged and concentration of poverty, most likely?
I am, but I'm rural.
I think that's what's being hit there in that big bullet right there. So I'm fine.
All right. Okay, are we ready to move on to additional dollars? All right, the additional dollar slide says, going back to the pyramid, these are the areas that receive the most positive feedback in terms of what may be considered for additional funding. So it's not part of the base, but if I'm assuming what it's saying is if you do these things, well, I guess that's what it's saying. You would get additional funding. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else understands that better. So if in terms of financial literacy.
Is this the direct dollars? I've not seen it as additional before, but I do recall the term direct dollars being used that goes outside of the base and weight.
You're right. On the pyramid, it is called direct funding, the dollar amount allocated to students based on specific programs.
Yes, it's the same thing. Two different, it's additional dollars on the slide, and then direct funding is the way we've seen it before.
Okay. So that would mean that you get a certain amount of money for your financial literacy program, and would that depend on how many students are enrolled in the program? Or I guess my question is, why wouldn't that be in the base, I guess?
Are these things connected to mandates of sorts? When I think of the tutoring that needs to be offered and connected to certain legislation, or the extended school year, or am I off base on that?
That makes sense to me, Katrine. That
it hasn't been mentioned to us that these are mandated.
The only one that I would look at, and of course, the only mandate I can think of in high school is the personal finance. That's a mandate, but this wouldn't be financial. I mean, it would, but I don't know in what context. I mean, obviously, financial literacy is something that you would teach there.
I think there's been some discussion moving financial literacy starting at the earlier grades in middle school, as opposed to waiting to high school. So maybe this is one that they're talking about, is providing some funding so they can start financial literacy earlier than the mandated. Something we ought to find out.
Okay.
The narrative at the bottom says that this section would be for areas that are not funded for all students base and are not included in a weight.
And I think some of them make perfect sense for that. I mean, to me, extended school year would be a decision that a board makes, and you would have to have additional funding to do. RTI does not make a lot of sense to me, because I think we agreed that's something we all have to do by law, and is a process and requires funding. So it may just be some clarification on in Bob's suggestion that the financial literacy might be similar to middle school CTE, that you sign up for it and there are additional funds allocated if you're willing to do, you know, meet the requirements of that program, is what I'm hearing.
Two, I think I would like to see moved up if possible. One is the dual credit courses. Students that take dual credit in high school, they're not eligible for the Tennessee Promise, and so they end up having to pay for that out of their own money. I've talked to Senator Yeager. I think he has some of those now paid for, and I think he would like to get eventually 6 dual credit courses paid for. But any support that to encourage, it saves dollars and gets students ready for post-secondary much better. And then the other one is summer programming. I think that's shown some significant success, summer programming. Those are 2 areas that I would support moving up.
I agree. When I was a high school principal, we did summer school just for kids that didn't pass the courses every single summer and had to charge tuition of the kids. And, that was completely self-funded, which I don't think is a model most people would prefer. And those are the kids that, and most of them were the kids that need it, not the most. They need additional access to those courses. And in that regard, what about, I know there's different ways to look at virtual learning, but we talk about rural districts, and even in our district, we're starting a high school next year, and we keep saying, well, what if we're going to offer French and Spanish? What if a kid comes in and he's had German 1 and he needs German 2? Are there additional funds for? We're told we can't charge that student tuition, which I understand. So that would be totally on us to kind of help them out of that situation. Should there be additional funding for?
Yeah, I think virtual funding is, if we look down the road where we are, where we're gonna be. I mean, you look at the AP access to all, that's already started out to be a significant success. So from that standpoint, something like that.
Yep. Right.
I'd like to just chime in. I'm just maybe seeing it after the kids all leave you all, and then I'm here. And one thing that I haven't heard us talk very much about is the overall health and wellness initiatives as it relates to healthy living. Obviously childhood obesity is on the rise. It is with adults too. So that's just something that I think that we need to think about, the overall health and well-being of kids, and beyond just a health class, and maybe it fits in with the nurse program that you have, but just overall health and fitness is I feel like needs to be included. But I'm interested in to see if what your opinion is on that, all of you.
Well, to your point, Vanessa, what about if we added the coordinated school health? Because that's certainly a mandate. We're all working on that. That could certainly work in this area, and that hits 8 different areas of health and wellness, which would, Vanessa, get to what you're saying and incorporate some SEL related to mental health and wellness as well.
Excellent. Love it.
Yeah, I definitely support that. Tennessee, I think we were number 1. We may have moved to number 3 or 4 in the nation in childhood obesity. And we've got to do something about that, because down the road, it's going to cost us a lot more money as they become adults. So
it costs us too, people calling out or things that we have to do to help people, because, they weren't taught. And I don't blame that on the schools at all. It's just that the lifestyles of parents, but I just think that might be something that would be good to add.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we may take for granted we have coordinated school health coordinators, but it is through a grant program, and there's a little difference between a grant program and something that the state says this is important enough to be part of the base. So I think, are we agreeing that coordinated school health should be part of the base, really, for all students? It touches all students.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else that's not kind of mentioned?
While we're here and landed in this spot, what about social workers? We currently fund 2 social workers here in the district, providing extensive support to general education and special education students. Should that be in a base, in your opinion?
I do. it's easy to just say yes to everything, but we had that conversation recently. We had a social worker that didn't quite work out. We were having the conversation about, was that the person or the position? And I think that what we came up with, it was in that case, probably the person. We at least, some call them transition coordinators or, community resource coordinators, just somebody that's got the relationships in the community and can get the kids the help they need. That's different from a guidance counselor or school counselor and a psychologist. Certainly, I think that's a great point, Katrine.
Yeah. The other thing I think about is a behavior specialist or a behavior therapist, behavior consultant. We have a couple of those as well. And like our social workers, I mean, it is all day long, every day for these team members. There just are some extensive needs out there.
Mm-hmm. Everybody good with that? As we go back to the base. And I know we talked a lot. I'm kind of surprised it didn't come up on now that we're again jumping back up to that slide, but we talked a lot about translators, just being something we've pretty much got to have these days.
Yes, amen.
And I guess the question is that a weight because of your EL population? And maybe it's just a way of, maybe that's the way to look at it. I guess some districts don't have that need as much. Maybe we just have to consider that real closely when we wait for EL, that we are talking about additional staff to do translating. Okay. Are we comfortable moving on to the outcome slide and moving on along? All right, these are the areas that receive the most positive feedback in terms of what may be considered for outcomes. So this is my understanding is you'd get additional dollars depending on your success in kind of offering and meeting metrics in these different areas, I believe. EPSO completion, AP course completion or passing. And then it talks about for all students or maybe only for economically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities and English learners, which are usually underrepresented in AP courses, industry certifications or certificates, work-based learning, closing the achievement gap. So there were multiple ideas on how to measure that. Reading proficiency, multiple ideas on that. Differentiated compensation support. Any feedback on how that strikes you? If there was a system where they said, we're going to give you additional money depending on these outcomes.
Well, I will chime in and say that I do think we need to consider these things for all students as educators and leaders. That's who we are here to serve, everyone. And so we want all to have wonderful opportunities for successful outcomes. So I lean toward all.
I agree with that.
Sounds like a strong recommendation and a consensus. So Penny, if you could make that note. Anybody else struck by this?
What about military, junior ROTC or something? Where does that fit in? Is that something that would be a positive outcome? I know we've had students that have really succeeded in there that would not have succeeded elsewhere.
So what might the outcome to that be? Because we have a great JROTC program. Are you thinking the outcome is their next step connected to ROTC, that is entering into the military, that is joining an institution in which they continue the work in a...
Yeah, I mean, if you think about sort of the four possible outcomes, you want them people to either have EPSO, a college dual credit, industry certification, or military participation or something like that. And so if they're in JROTC, which then gives them an assignment or they get a scholarship to that would be a positive outcome for that district. I know just local Oak Ridge ROTC was on the news yesterday that they are the only JROTC in the state of Tennessee who got to participate in the parade over at Pearl Harbor this week. And so they're in Hawaii this week, you know. So encouraging things like that, I think to encourage that would be a positive outcome that might get some extra points or something.
I like that. Tullahoma just became a Naval Honor School under the ROTC program. That could be an outcome as well.
Absolutely.
I like the idea of additional funding for every group we send to Hawaii. Sign me up. We'll get some groups to Hawaii. They'll need chaperones. Okay, so let's add. I do think that's a fair point. If we're talking about EPSO completion, we do, like you said, we talk about workforce. We talk about we talk about college, workforce, and then military are kind of probably the first three we think of when you'd like to have those options, or at least one of them when you graduate from high school. That might be one where there'll be multiple ideas on measurement. Maybe we can clean that up. I know typically the military, having been at an ROTC school, the military funds part of it, but you are on the hook for the part that they don't fund, certainly, and it can be expensive. Okay, great ideas. We're heading into the last 9 or so minutes. Just a few more things to talk about, but anything else stand out here that would be outcomes based? I do think the devil's in the details with some of these, closing the achievement gap and reading proficiently. You'd hate to. It's a tough thing to do because you know that there is the thought the rising tide raises all boats, and sometimes you can work really hard on closing a gap, and you wind up where everybody's doing better, but the gap stays the same. That's probably familiar for those of us that have been high school principals. So making sure that that's being recognized as well.
Ted, looking over these outcomes, you know, one of the things that we kind of do here in the county, we do something called a work ethics diploma, adding that onto it, you know, because soft skills is a huge deficit, you know, in our system. It may not be in some of your systems, but it's a huge deficit.
I'm trying to think. It may have been your county. I saw a great presentation at one of the TOSS conferences on those work ethic diplomas. That was neat.
We have the same thing in Clarksville, Montgomery. We have that diploma that our students work towards.
What does differentiated compensation support mean as it relates to outcomes?
That would be another question for
That must be a
clarification.
good question.
So here's how I would explain. I would interpret that is that when you think about differentiated compensation for hard to fill positions, like maybe a chemistry professor or physics teacher, being able to provide additional compensation, and so that if you're able to fill those positions, then maybe you get some additional dollars or something like that to pay the differentiated pay. I don't know. That's what I would think.
Yeah, I was just wondering how it fit into the outcome element. I wasn't sure what the outcome was for that.
I would say a hired teacher or something would be a possible outcome. Thinking again from the rural areas, I mean, that's a big factor in the rural communities, is being able to get teachers in those specific areas.
I was thinking, I read something in some of the information that we received about like national board certification, that teachers are compensated as they earn those levels of, additional training, or not just a degree, but if they become nationally board certified, then they get additional compensation. Maybe it has something to do with that, which could be outcomes based in terms of better student performance, better teaching, higher quality. I don't know.
And could be an outcome just in and of itself with a teacher pursuing that gold standard as that one example.
Right.
It'd be interesting to know for sure what is meant by that.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned that, maybe it is, some of us pay extra for doctorates, or, EDSs, they may be talking about that, a more qualified workforce. I don't know. Okay. All right. Well, are everybody comfortable moving on? Don't want to rush anybody, but I know we're all got places to be. I think the end of this, Penny, if I'm correct, was just kind of opening back up that conversation about the must-have, should-have, nice-to-have, and the long shot. If there's anything, I think we've done a good job kind of touching on those throughout this conversation. But are there any things that have come up either through your internal feedback? And Katrine, this might be an opportunity if you wanted to give a kind of quick report on the overview of the feedback you got, or were there things that stood out to you that were maybe had not been brought up on our call, or that are not on the state's list?
Not necessarily anything that's not on the list, but what I would say, and I'm sure many of you have done this, I ended up just posing the question to all superintendents in my study council, school board members, and finance directors, just what recommendations do you have on what should be incorporated into a school funding model? I did relay that I would share every idea given and that I would, keep it anonymous. And I would share it both with the subcommittee facilitator and chair, and then of course with TN EDU funding. And I really believe we got a healthy dose of input. And I think the voices of those who are engaged so deeply with budgeting and looking at this funding formula, if you will, really needed to be engaged, and people were appreciative that I had asked the question. So just wanted to share, it's a great way to get additional feedback. Lots of ideas are probably amen in terms of what we've talked about today through the feedback that I've received.
Well, I'm going to make sure that was not forwarded on to this group either. So I'm going to send that on as well and do that right now. That's your intention, Katrine, is that right? Work for you?
Oh yeah, I'm glad for anyone to see it. I went ahead and sent it to you and Penny just so you all knew something I had done and some feedback I had gotten, in case that helped either of you. But I also then sent it to the funding email that we've been provided, so they had it as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to close the loop and send it to this group, and then I think everybody that would benefit from it will have gotten it at that point. Okay, great. All right, last few minutes. Anything jump out at you that we've really not touched on, and you feel like, man, we're just the feedback and everybody else is just missing this, and we need to make sure it's on the list? Anything?
Dr. Horrell, we may have Mr. Eby share what his feedback was that he received.
Yeah, please, Bob. Oh, you're muted, I think, Bob. Are you muted, Bob?
Thank you. Sorry. I think you sent the letter out. It was one that I got from the Coalition of Better Schools, and I would just encourage people to read it. And it talks about, basically municipalities and affects them. So I won't, in the shortness of time, I won't go through that, but just it's I think a good letter, and brings up aspects we talked about already, maintenance of effort and some of the other things, taxation, that ought to be considered.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts for this group?
I had one question, sort of a process question. I know this is recorded, but I have had people ask, how soon will it be available for people to go online and watch? Do we know?
It's available now.
Okay.
I send the recording to TNEDU, and they get it posted immediately. So it will be up within 30 minutes. Kevin Kennedy is on it at the department, so it will be posted.
Thank you.
Great question. Any other questions or closing comments? All right. Well, as they say on our statewide calls, I'll give you the last 15 seconds of your day back, because I think we're about to hit 1 o'clock. But I appreciate everybody's engagement and your forethought on this. I think this is good feedback, and I think it's helpful having a group, a high quality group like this that is kind of thinking through these things and asking these good questions. So I'm definitely grateful. And it is 1 o'clock, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. Okay.
Good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.